today's video is about the buying process in Costa Rica. So everything from the point to where you've identified the property you want through to when you've got the keys in your hand. The good news is the process is very similar to in North America. Everything can be done in English. Everything's very transparent and a very established system that does actually work down here. My name is Richard Lacey, Tamarindo Rich. If you like what we're talking about today, please like below, subscribe. If you've been through the process and found anything different, or if you agree with any of the points, please leave me a message. Thanks. Now, there are a certain number of deals that fail. Some of them fail for good reasons, like your lawyer identifies a problem, or you do the property inspection and it throws up a leaky roof that you didn't know about. It's going to be expensive. Other things fail because of a failure to either understand the system or frustration that the buyer has due to the process or due to an awkward seller, which are really things that can be overcome, but sometimes emotions get in the way and ego get in the way, and a deal that should have worked, that makes sense for a buyer, fails for some reason. So we're going to touch on those points as well, the sort of the deal psychology, the bit I actually enjoy in the process. I'm also at the end going to talk about the Costa Rican way of doing something. So you might find yourself in a scenario where none of the things I'm talking about here are acceptable to the seller, and that's a really important thing, sort of what the old-fashioned Costa Ricans do and the old-style lawyers, and I'll just touch on that bit at the end. So the process is fairly straightforward. First, identify the property, make a written offer, go through the negotiating process, get to an agreement with a signed offer and acceptance, then the escrow with the deposit, the due diligence, and then the closing. Sounds simple, right? So let's touch each of those points step by step. So the first part in the process, identifying the property. Now, Costa Rica, there are good realtors, bad realtors, and then doing a deal with no realtor. And a good realtor will charge the seller 6% and give you good advice, save you a lot of time, help you avoid bad properties at an early stage. It's a property that's clearly built on government land or in a national park, or they built 3 stories where your realtor knows that only 2 stories are allowed. So a good realtor can save you a lot of time. Some people would rather go straight to a seller because they feel that they'll get a better deal because they're saving this 6% that your lawyer would done. And it might be true. You might be lucky and find it directly with a seller and it all works out perfectly. But generally the whole industry of realtors is built up because they can help you save time and money. Now in Costa Rica, you don't need to be registered anywhere. Any taxi driver can wake up in the morning and call himself a realtor. And there are a lot of bad realtors here. And often what they'll do is they'll take a piece of land that's say 100,000 and then they offer it to you at 150,000 and they hope to pocket 50,000 from the deal. So you really need to be aware that this can exist in Costa Rica and you really need to eliminate this. So number one is any good realtor is registered with SUGEF, and there's a link below to the site that explains a bit more. It's basically a government body that shows that this person is paying real estate taxes and doing what he should be doing. And then there are 2 professional bodies which any good realtor is a part of. And within that, there is a complaints procedure. So if he's a bad actor, anyone can bring a case against him and he can be thrown out of those bodies, and there's a public record of what he's done in the past. So that's a sort of a bit of background check on what you should be doing to check that you've got a good realtor. Another good way to find a trustworthy realtor is to go with a real estate brand that you recognize. Most of the large brands are here in Costa Rica. Generally, any realtor that's associated with those brands, generally they've undergone training through the US branch of their real estate company, and it tends to be that the brokers of those companies will get rid of any bad actors at a fairly early stage. That gives you an extra level of comfort in a more unregulated market. So I say it's more important down here to go with a brand than it would be in North America. The second stage is choosing a good lawyer. The good news is that most attorneys speak perfect English. All the contracts are done in English. and you can contact them anytime you want. You don't need to be in the country at all for the process, but normally when I'm showing properties, I will always introduce a couple of different law firms so the buyer can just look them in the eyes and just decide if they can, it's the sort of person they want to do business with, go with a larger law firm so they've got a breadth of knowledge and a good reputation in the market here in Costa Rica. The number one most important thing is that your lawyer is completely independent to your seller, independent and completely on your side, has a breadth of knowledge, has experience and history, and of course all lawyers here have to be registered with the government. There are certain professional bodies for lawyers. So that's the number one thing, that you've got your realtor and you have your lawyer on your side and independent. So you found a property that you love, you've got your advisors selected. The next part is the offer and acceptance process. So either one of your advisors will have a sort of standard format offer letter where the key points are the closing date, the amount of the deposit, and the closing costs. So this is the first part in the process where ego can come into play. And sometimes buyers feel that they need to have a win. So they might not be getting everything that they want from their offer. I mean, generally offers right now are, say, coming in about 10% below asking price. And then there's generally a back and forth, 2 or 3 iterations of the contract until you have a deal that's accepted by both parties. It's very easy for ego to come involved, and even though the end deal is an attractive deal, because you haven't won the process, you may want to withdraw. And it's the first stage where you just got to keep your eye on the prize and just think what your end goal is, and if the property you found is in line with what your aspiration and your budget was at an earlier stage. Once you have your offer accepted, the next process is to put your deposit into an escrow account. It's generally 10% of the asking price, but it could be a little bit more, a little bit less. All escrow companies need to be registered with SUGEF, S-U-G-E-F, which is basically the body that covers all banking in the country. This is very important because this is where you're going to start sending large amounts of money. Costa Rica has very strict anti-money laundering rules, and the process to get accepted by your escrow company is fairly painful. They will ask for a lot of information, a lot of very personal questions about how you've earned your money, and it's generally people feel it's a bit intrusive. But it's just a painful part of the process that you need to go through in order to be able to send your funds to escrow and process the transaction. So I just say have lots of patience. This will probably be your first exposure to how much the Costa Ricans love paperwork and documentation. And they're not always the most organized, so they will ask you for these 10 documents, you diligently go away and get them, present them, and then they go, oops, no, we need these other 2 documents, and by the way, the deadline was yesterday. So you just have to have a smile on your face and go, yes, of course, and work through it. Now this is another stage where some buyers get so frustrated that they haven't quite got all their documentation together in the right way, or it's been rejected 2 or 3 times, that they throw their hands up and walk away. You just need to focus on the prize, work through it, and think about the end goal. So now you're into the due diligence process. Generally, this is a 4-week period. Could be longer, could be shorter, but for any normal property, 3 weeks for actually doing the due diligence is plenty, and then an extra week to organize the final funds and then the closing. So this will be mainly done by your lawyer, but the realtor will be involved to some extent or another. The lawyer will be checking the ownership of the property, who is authorized to do the transfer deed, to transfer the property into your name. They'll check to see if there are any liens, mortgages, any taxes not paid on the property. There will be an inspection, depending on whether it's just a new condo or an old farmhouse. It will depend how much detail you need to go into, but generally it'll be a builder or an engineer that will go in and produce a great long report for you that will go down to every little detail, taking photos of the faucets and the little bit of rust here or whatever, right up to pictures of the roof that needs replacing, or whatever that might be. And then at the end of the 3 weeks, the lawyer will produce a due diligence report, and you'll have that, and you'll have your inspector's report, topography report maybe that will map out the corners of the lot. So once you have your due diligence report, there are going to be certain red line items which are non-negotiable and just walk away. Certain items that are open for negotiation, and then certain items where you're just going to have to say, well, okay, I'm buying a 15-year-old property. It's normal that the dishwasher's not working or that's not working. Generally, properties are sold as is. So you'll receive a 15-page report on every little detail from the inspector, that this needs doing, that needs changing, this wall's got a little ding in it or whatever. Your seller's going to go, hey, it's an older house, do you want it or don't you? And you're going to say, no, I want this fixing, I want that fixing, or whatever. And generally, if it's damage that will be normal in a house of that age, you just have to accept it. If it's unexpected things, like there's a hole in the roof that you didn't know about, then that's a negotiated item, and it's very reasonable to either ask the seller to make the repairs or to ask for a discount. I always recommend asking for a discount, because the seller just wants to do the job as quickly, as cheaply as possible, paper over it and get the hell out. And you're looking at a repair that's going to last you for the next 10 or 15 years. So I always think it's better to go for a dollar amount, even if that doesn't cover it completely, but then at least you're in charge of getting everything done, and it's done to your standards for the next few years. If at this point you decide to reject the due diligence, your deposit is returned to you, less some costs. So there'll be a cost for the topographer, a cost for the inspector, a cost for the due diligence, maybe the escrow, and maybe some bank charges, but very modest numbers, and all those items should be agreed up front, so there are no surprises, and then the balance of the funds gets returned to you. If you accept the due diligence, generally there's an extra week in which you've got time to get the balance of your funds into the escrow account, and then a closing date is chosen. As I say, you don't need to be in the country for the closing process. Almost every property is owned through a corporation. So let's say you're buying it with your spouse, and you want to have 50-50 of the shares, then rather than you owning 50% of the property, you own 50% of the shares in the corporation that owns the property. And this is generally the way things are done here. Okay, closing costs. Closing costs a little bit over 4% of the agreed price. The actual amount might vary slightly, but if you figure on 4.1, 4.2%, then you round about. Most deals, the closing costs are split 50-50 between buyer and seller. But this is a negotiated item. Often Costa Ricans are used to the buyer paying all of the closing costs. Americans are used to splitting it 50-50. So it depends on the deal, and it depends on who you're dealing with. But I'd say in most cases that 4% is split 50-50. As a buyer, you'll have some additional costs. If you're buying through a corporation, that could be $900 or $1,000. Your inspection, depending on the property, will be around about $500, and then there'll be some fee for the escrow company. That's generally fairly modest. The seller is responsible for paying the real estate agent. So the day of the closing, you do not need to be here for that, and most buyers are not in the country for the actual day of the closing. It could be just the two lawyers together processing the documents, or you could have a room full of people where you've got the buyer, the seller, the bank that's holding the mortgage, realtors for both sides, lawyers for both sides. So you could have a whole room of people, or it could just all be done remotely. And there'll be a big ledger book where it's written in Spanish, which is the actual transfer deed for the property. And then generally in the national registry of the country, eventually the ownership will be registered in there. And that process normally takes 10 to 14 days after the closing actually happens and after the transfer of funds. Now, the TICO way, and I've seen this a few times, and these are the way that if you're buying an old farm and the old farmer's got an old lawyer, then they will propose a completely different way to you. They will have never heard of escrow and not want to work with an escrow. They will want a deposit paying directly to the seller. And this is before you even have done any due diligence, so you don't know if he actually owns it, or if he's got 5 brothers that all get a 5th share, or if there are legal problems with the land. He might say it's refundable. but you try getting money back from him, you probably won't. So you've got to say, this is, I would only go forward with this process if you really feel you're getting the deal of the century. I would not recommend this at all. But they will want hard money directly to their bank account, and day of the closing they'll want a certified check. Generally, when I've seen this, I just walk away because it rings the alarm bells. But you might come across these kind of people in this kind of process. As I say, I wouldn't get involved. So if you've enjoyed today's video, please subscribe below, like, and send me a comment. Let me know what you think.